Welcome back to U.S. History. This is the last video of week 5. So, hopefully you've gotten all of your homeworks and your quiz and your test for chapter 22 all complete and in your packet ready to go. Make sure that you've gotten all that taken care of. We are watching the last video of week 5. So after this, you can enjoy your weekend and we'll get to it. But let's get right to it today. We've talked about battling communism. We saw how during the declaration of the Cold War, Winston Churchill was quick to identify that problem, and Truman's response was containment. The idea of we can't do anything about the areas that the Soviets have already taken over, but we can prevent them from expanding any further. Number 3, let's see how this containment goes. Middle East and the Mediterranean. First of all, in Iran. Soviet troops had moved into Iran during World War II, and at this point they withdrew from the strategically important region. So all you need to know about Iran is the Soviets left Iran. Reasons for it include things with British and American pressure to get away, and so on and so forth. But what you need to know is the Soviets were in Iran, and now they're leaving it. Greece and Turkey. A civil war erupted in Greece as communists tried to take over the country. In Turkey, the Soviets pressured them for territory and naval base that would connect the USSR to the Mediterranean Sea. So 2 more countries were being threatened by the Soviet Union. Truman responded with what became known as the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was a policy of aiding countries fighting communist takeovers. The U.S. sent $400 million to aid Greece and Turkey, and the end result was both countries were able to successfully ward off a communist takeover. So what happened to Greece and Turkey? Soviets tried to take them over, tried to spread communism into those countries, but thanks to the Truman Doctrine and a lot of financial aid, both countries were able to stop the communist takeover. The U.S. was backing words with action. Number 4, Western Europe. How well off was Western Europe after World War II's end? The answer is bad, economically. With bad economies, communism was beginning to germinate, especially in the countries of Italy and France. So, to immunize the disease, the U.S. sent in more aid. This was known as the Marshall Plan. It was led by the Secretary of State, George C. Marshall. It offered a plan for massive economic aid to all European countries. In fact, even Russia and the other communist countries were offered aid. Of course, Soviet-controlled countries refused the aid. The Soviet Union ordered the other countries to refuse the aid because, after all, they're communists. What good are they if they accept money from the evil U.S., capitalistic evil U.S.? But Western Europe welcomed it. In all, the Marshall Plan cost about $13 billion on restoring the economy of Western Europe. Why was it so important to send financial aid to Turkey, Greece, and Western Europe? Well, if things had continued the way they were, the real-life possibility was those countries dealing with a post-war economy could have fallen to communism, and then the U.S. would have lost all of their allies in the fight against the Soviet Union. Communism would have been growing, capitalism would have been shrinking. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was also founded in Western Europe during this time. It's called NATO today. Definition of NATO was a military alliance among the Western nations and the U.S. in the event of a Soviet attack. This alliance included the US, Canada, and 8 Western European countries. The alliance further divided East and West. In response to NATO, the Soviets created their own alliance, known as the Warsaw Pact. This was a communist alliance in Eastern Europe to counteract NATO. You can either see the map there, or if you look in your books at page 530, it shows the countries that joined NATO and the countries that joined the Warsaw Pact. Another huge consequence of World War II was the division of East and West Germany. World War II had ended with Germany being cut in half between Western forces and Soviet forces. Afterward, Germany was divided into 4 zones. 3 zones controlled by Britain, France, and the US joined together to form West Germany. The last zone, controlled by the Soviet Union, became Communist East Germany. So West Germany was controlled by the Allies. East Germany was controlled by the Soviets. Berlin had also been divided into 4 zones and then becoming just 2. Yet, Berlin was located in the middle of East Germany. In opposition to West Germany's unification, Stalin decided to blockade West Berlin until it surrendered or forced the West to make a compromise. On page 529, it shows you a map of what we've just described, the different zones that were created, as well as Berlin itself being divided up among the Allies and the Soviets. So, what should be done? There's some free areas in Berlin. This was a key tipping point in the Cold War. If we allow the Soviets to blockade Berlin, well, then they get their way. If we allow them to continue the blockade, we allow them to take over. That would be giving in to Soviet control. That would be allowing containment to fail. Oh, maybe we could send in troops to liberate West Berlin. Well, that was another possibility, but also that faced great consequences as well. If we invade Berlin to free it, then the Soviets might use that as an excuse to start World War III. So what's the solution to dealing with the Berlin blockade? Truman had a response. It's called the Berlin Airlift. Truman responded with a massive airlift of food and supplies to West Berlin. We didn't have to go on any Soviet soil. We were able to fly planes overhead, land them in West Berlin, and give them the needs that the people there needed. Although expensive, it showed Stalin that the West was unwilling to lose West Berlin. The Soviet Union was forced to end the blockade. The 2 countries of East Germany and West Germany would remain divided for over 40 years until 1990. Number 5. Year of Shox. We told you the Berlin Airlift was kind of the first major tipping point of the Cold War. Another tipping point took place in the year 1949. In 1949, on a very testable date, 2 things actually took over. Communists under Mao Zedong, see pictured on your left, took control of China from the nationalists, which had been led by Chiang Kai-shek, pictured in the middle. China had been dealing with the Civil War since the 1920s. Japan's invasion only temporarily ended the conflict between the nationalists and the communists. Afterward, the fighting ensued. Although the U.S. supported the nationalists and provided them $2 billion, the communists eventually took over. Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists fled to Taiwan and set up its own free China. In fact, the UN identified Taiwan as the real China in international issues until 1970. Another key moment in 1949 was when the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. Before this time, the U.S. had the sole monopoly control of nuclear weapons. This forced Truman to reevaluate America's defense policy. Truman was forced to increase the number of troops since an atomic attack on the USSR was now less likely. Also, he promoted more research into developing more powerful weapons. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. detonated what became known as the H-bomb, the hydrogen bomb. In 1952, the U.S. developed the first hydrogen bomb. It had an explosive power hundreds of times greater than the atomic bombs. But within a year, the Soviets had also developed the H-bomb. That's all the material that we're going to cover for today. I hope you all enjoy your weekend. Make sure you get the homeworks, the quiz, and the Chapter 22 test all taken care of before you turn in your packets on Monday. Be good, do good. Bye.